Hello and welcome. You're watching Race to Power. My name is Mohammed Saleh. And on the show tonight, we'll be getting you the details of how the intruders who created the ruckus in the lower house of the parliament in India had actually meticulously planned for months to execute this shocking security breach. And the opposition is, of course, not losing the momentum of this incident and is cornering the government and is asking questions over how this incident has actually exposed the very porous nature of the security measures that have been taken in this new parliament building. And the other big story that we are tracking on our show tonight is, will the American women have access to safe medically assisted abortion? Now remember, this is a question that will dominate the American politics all through the weeks and months of election campaigning in the lead up to the presidential polls next year, as a heavily conservative bench of the US Supreme Court is preparing to hear a petition about the right for American women to have control over their reproductive choices in an issue that divides the American society right down the middle. And in Japan, the Fumio Kishida government is facing some pretty rough weather, as a corruption scandal in the ruling party has now forced Fumio Kishida to revamp his cabinet by sacking some of his closest aides within his government. But let's of course start with a big development from India. Now remember, the Indian Parliament saw the opposition uproar over the major security breach that was witnessed on Wednesday afternoon. Now the opposition is up in arms against the government. It is demanding for an explanation as to how a breach of this scale could even take place. 15 parliamentarians were suspended amidst the uproar for their unruly behavior, and our next report gets you more details.
The above mentioned member be suspended from the service of the House from the remainder of the session under Rule 374(2).
Those in favor may say aye. Those against may say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted.
Shri Derek O'Brien, member is suspended for the remaining part of this session.
संसद के अंदर ये बात जब होती है, इस तरह का कुकृत्य होता है, तो ये सिर्फ संसद का मामला नहीं है, ये सुरक्षा का मामला है। जो व्यक्ति, जो सरकार अपनी संसद को सुरक्षित नहीं रह सकती है, देश उनके हाथों में सुरक्षित।
बहुत ही दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण घटना है, इसमें कहीं दो मत नहीं है, और आपने तुरंत इसका संज्ञान लेते हुए इस मामले की पूरी जांच का जो है आदेश दे दिया है। मैं समझता हूं कि भविष्य में हम सारे सांसद, चाहे वो पक्ष के हों अथवा प्रतिपक्ष के हों, सभी को सावधानी बरतने की आवश्यकता है।
Both houses of the Indian Parliament plunged into pandemonium just a day after the major security breach. The opposition is up in arms against the government. After all, the lapse in the security of the Parliament is as serious as it could be. Questions are being asked about the multi-layered security of the Parliament. How can someone enter the chambers when the House is in session? And with them, smuggle pressurized canisters of coloured smoke inside the House. The Lok Sabha Secretariat has suspended 8 officials over the same. The Lok Sabha Speaker has even held talks with members of opposition.
मैंने आपसे कल चर्चा की है, संवाद किया है, फिर हम चर्चा करेंगे, आप लोगों सबको बुलाकर चर्चा करेंगे। सारी सुरक्षा की जिम्मेदारी और क्षेत्राधिकार लोकसभा सचिवालय का है। सबकी सुरक्षा की जिम्मेदारी लोकसभा अध्यक्ष के नाते मेरी है, इसलिए मैं आपसे वेट कर सब चर्चा करूंगा।
But the opposition is not convinced. The parties of the opposition alliance are demanding a detailed statement by India's Home Minister in both houses. Followed by a discussion on the security breach, they also want strict action against BJP MP Pratap Simha, who provided the visitor passes to the intruders.
ये बहुत गंभीर मामला है। कल जो हुआ, जो सुरक्षा प्रावधानों का उल्लंघन हुआ, बहुत गंभीर मसला है और इस पर कार्रवाई तो हो रही है, पर हम गृह मंत्री की ओर से एक बयान चाहते हैं। कल भी हमने मांग की थी, आज भी हमने मांग की है और कल भी हम करते रहेंगे। जब तक गृह मंत्री नहीं आएंगे, बयान नहीं देंगे, सदन की चलने की संभावना बहुत कम है।
You heard it. The opposition is not ready to let the parliament function if their demands are not met. 15 opposition lawmakers were suspended from the lower house and one was suspended from the upper house over the ruckus in the parliament today. Opposition members have trooped into the well of the house, raising slogans demanding the presence of Home Minister Amit Shah in the house over the security breach. Both houses were adjourned for the day. The suspension of MPs is not going to make things easy, and the rift between the opposition and the government is only expected to grow here on. Note that the general elections in the country are just months away, and the breach has given the opposition enough ammunition. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
We're staying on with more developments from India. A court in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh has now delivered an order allowing for the inspection of a historic Mughal-era Shahi Idar Masjid in Mathura that is located less than 200 kilometers from the national capital, New Delhi. Now, Mathura is in fact considered to be the birthplace of Lord Shri Krishna, the revered Hindu deity. The Hindu petitioners in this case believe that this historic Mughal-era mosque, built on the orders of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb way back in 1670, reportedly was constructed atop the birthplace of Shri Krishna. This is what the petitioners claim. Now, today the mosque complex lies adjacent to a Krishna Janmasthal temple, which is already located there right next to the mosque. The latest petition, which was allowed by the court, now seeks a survey of the Shahi Idar Mosque. The petition pleads that the High Court should pass an order directing the Shahi Idar Mosque Committee to, in fact, remove the structure upon the land that they claim belongs to them. Now, at least about a dozen cases have been filed in courts in Mathura by different petitioners. The Allahabad High Court, taking up the cases, has appointed 3 advocates as commissioners and has also ordered them to survey the disputed premises. Now, this is a key issue. There are medieval constructions around certain Hindu sites that have been heavily contested, and this has led to politically charged debates over the last few decades in India. Now, the Hindu revivalist forces see the medieval constructions as an encroachment on their sacred sites, and therefore they want these medieval era constructions to be removed. Now, Ayodhya, Varanasi and Mathura are amongst the most prominent cases. A temple at Ayodhya is, of course, being constructed. It is about to be inaugurated in January next month by the Indian Prime Minister, just ahead of the 2024 general elections. And in 2019, remember, the Supreme Court had, of course, settled a decades-long dispute in Ayodhya, allowing the Hindu petitioners to build a temple in the place that they consider is the birthplace of Lord Shri Ram. Now, in the face of the mounting abortion bans and restrictions that have been enacted by Republican-led states, the American President Joe Biden is in fact seeking to preserve access to the most widely used abortion pill in the United States of America, mifepristone. Now, the American Supreme Court is all set to hear arguments for what will be a major ruling on whether women in America will have control over their bodies, whether women can choose to have a safe, medically assisted abortion or not. And all of this will, of course, play out just months ahead of the big 2024 presidential elections. The Biden administration has, in fact, asked the court to overturn a decision that limited access to the drug. The top court will be hearing arguments early next year, and a ruling is, of course, expected next summer, with the presidential polls knocking on the doors of the Americans. This current issue over American women having access to safe, medically assisted abortion is going to play out in a very big way. Remember, this issue, of course, began in November 2022 when an umbrella group of anti-abortion doctors and activists had claimed that the Food and Drug Administration had unlawfully approved the drug. They also alleged that the pill was actually unsafe and that the court had overturned the Roe v. Wade, which was a landmark ruling that was given back in 1973, ending a nationwide access for American women for a right to safe abortion. Now, since the overturning of that judgment, at least about 14 states in the United States of America at this moment have put in place outright abortion bans, while many others are currently prohibiting abortion after a certain duration of pregnancy. The case also puts the court back in the position to decide the rights that American women have over their own bodies so far as reproduction is concerned. Now remember, the abortion pill has been legal in the United States since 2000 onwards, and research has shown that it is safe. But the American Apex Court at this moment has a 6-3 conservative majority. And former President Donald Trump appointed 3 of those members, all of whom have voted to overturn the Roe versus Wade judgment back in 2022. Now remember, Donald Trump is of course the Republican frontrunner in the upcoming polls, and with Biden placing abortion rights at the center of his campaign, this is going to be a very divisive issue that we'll hear about a lot in the upcoming presidential polls in the United States all through next year. Now, the Russia-Ukraine war is now in its 659th day. Ukraine is still battling the Russian troops with no plans to back down. The Russian President Vladimir Putin remains pretty firm on his vows and assurances that Russians will end up achieving their objectives no matter what. Now, earlier in the day, the Russian president held his very first major press conference since he launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. While much of the first part of the conference, in fact, focused on the importance of Russian sovereignty and the country's economy, within no time, the topic of conversation quickly moved to the war in Ukraine. Speaking about which, Vladimir Putin said that Russia's goals in Ukraine remain unchanged. Now, just a night after Ukraine's capital came under another missile attack and resulted in at least about 45 injuries and several damaged buildings, the Russian president warned the Ukrainian forces that Russian forces were improving their positions along the front lines. Even though a classified US intelligence report now estimates this week that nearly about 300,000 Russian soldiers had been either killed or wounded since the war began. In a rare detail, Putin mentioned that over 6,000 troops at this moment were on the battlefield. And he also dismissed the need for another mobilization wave because he said that Russia at this moment has more than sufficient troops. In fact, he went on to state that Russia at this moment has 600,000 troops operating in the battlefields in Ukraine. Listen.
Практически по всей линии.
Almost along the entire line of contact, our armed forces, to put it modestly, are improving their position. Almost everyone is in active stage of actions. Throughout the entire length, there is an improvement in the position of our troops.
The Russian president has also claimed that Ukraine has lost some of its best fighters while trying to secure a foothold on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River in the Kherson region.
If you count how much losses the armed forces of Ukraine have had in 1.5 months, you can imagine how substantial this is. I think this is stupid and irresponsible on behalf of the political leadership of the country, but that's their business.
All right, let's now give you some details from Japan, where Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at this moment is battling a major fallout from one of the biggest financial scandals that has hit his ruling Liberal Democrat Party in decades. Now, several cabinet ministers have already resigned over this scandal, with Fumio Kishida's administration's public support dropping to as low as just about 17% amongst the Japanese public. And this is the lowest since he had come to office in October 2021. So we'll tell you all that there is to know about this scandal. A criminal investigation is in fact underway against the dozens of lawmakers who have been accused of receiving proceeds from fundraising events. The scandal, in fact, involves millions of dollars that have been kept off official party records. And Japan's Political Funds Control Act bans corporate donations to individual lawmakers. But there is a loophole. A political entity can also legally raise funds through ticket sales through fundraising events and distribute it to member lawmakers, as long as they actually file for political funding reports. However, in this particular case, the party's internal factions allegedly did not disclose the full amount of the ticket revenues that were in fact transferred to some of the lawmakers. Some lawmakers also kept money that was not reported in their funding disclosures. Now, this probe that we are talking about centers around the LDP's biggest and the most powerful Sivakai faction. The faction was, of course, formerly led by the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and is still referred to as the Abe faction. The missing funds amount, believe it or not, to 500 million yen. That's roughly about 3.52 million American dollars. The reports in fact suggest that the funds were transferred to several dozen lawmakers, including high-ranking officials, over the course of the last 5 years. The Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno, the Trade Minister Yasutoshi Nishimura, and also the LDP's Policy Council Chief Koichi Haguida are each alleged to have received proceeds worth anywhere from 1 million to 10 million Japanese yen. All three of them have been resigned from their posts. Another Abe faction lawmaker, Hiroyuki Miyaza, has admitted to receiving such kickbacks in the past and has said that the faction officials had actually told him to keep it off the party's books. The scandals like these are not uncommon in Japanese politics. Money scandals have forced out a number of ruling administrators of the LDP that has held power for nearly all of Japan's post-war era. But this is one of the biggest scandals so far because of the money trail which is established in black and white that the kickbacks were in fact received by these leaders. So now that you know about the big scandal, let's also tell you as to what's happening at this moment in Japanese politics. The embattled Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has been forced to revamp his cabinet. He's replaced at least 4 cabinet ministers. The Prime Minister has also appointed the former Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi as the Chief Cabinet Secretary and the former Justice Minister Ken Saito as the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry. Now, Takayuki Matsumoto was appointed as the Internal Affairs Minister and Tetsushi Sakamoto was given the Agriculture portfolio. The new ministers also received their appointment documents from Kishida and bowed before Emperor Naruhito. In the lead-up to the polls in Taiwan, a senior leader of the Kuomintang party is in China to reach out to the Taiwanese community. But his visit has only deepened the divisions that the polls have long revealed. While Taiwan's ruling government, led by the Democrat Progressive Party, rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims in the island, 2 leading opposition parties, that is the Kuomintang and also the less-established Taiwan People's Party, have both now pledged to promote closer ties with China. And our next report gets you details as to how the Chinese question has exposed the deep divisions within the Taiwanese society. Take a look.
As Taiwan prepares to vote in the presidential and parliamentary elections next month, polls reveal deep divisions between generations towards its relationship with China. At this government-run veterans' care home in northern Taiwan, this former soldier's chest tattoo of the island's flag carries the complexities of those ties. Wang Zhiquan, who is 93, joined the Chinese army when he was only 13 and holds tragic memories of war.
I still dare not watch the news when I watch TV. War is cruel and cold. When I started serving as a soldier, people were forced to enlist during the civil war between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party. When they couldn't catch adults, they would catch children.
Defeated in the Chinese Civil War, the nationalist Kuomintang government fled to Taiwan 7 odd decades ago, but no peace treaty was ever signed to end the war. China's communist government has since been pushing for what it calls reunification with Taiwan and has ramped up its military pressure against the island in the past few years, stoking fears of a war that could drag in the United States. Those tensions are dominating election campaigns in the run-up to Taiwan's January 13th ballot. The ruling Democratic Progressive Party champions the island's separate identity from China. But despite moving to Taiwan and later fighting for its island of Kinmen, Wang's sense of identity remains tied to China.
Taiwan is a part of China. It has been since the Qing and Ming dynasties.
It's a view shared by many from his generation, like fellow care home resident Sun Guoxi. The 110-year-old veteran believes his current government is being provocative. He warns that if a conflict breaks out, the island would be no match for China. Yet their views conflict with mainstream Taiwan, who overwhelmingly view themselves as Taiwanese and not Chinese, according to polls.
All right, let's also now take a quick look as to what else is making news around the world so far as the political developments are concerned. And let's start with Chile, which is set to vote in a referendum on a new constitution that seeks to replace its dictatorship-era text. The push to rewrite the Chilean constitution dates back decades, from the era of the rule of General Augusto Pinochet. But the issue has gained traction out of the fiery protests over 4 years ago that was sparked in part by deep inequality that many have in fact blamed on the framework. But the irony is that the upcoming rewrite is going to be more conservative than the constitution that it claims to be replacing. We'll of course be tracking the developments very closely on the show. Meanwhile, in Argentina, trouble is brewing for the newly elected President Javier Milei. Now, Argentina's annual inflation rate has now hit a staggering 161%. You heard that right, 161% for the month of November, faster than expected, and this is the highest monthly figure this year, laying bare the daunting challenges that the new President Javier Milei faces in navigating the country's turbulent economic waters. Inflation is, of course, expected to climb faster in the months to come. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. Thanks for watching.
As democracy strengthens across the